Alright, I'm back with another video. This time I'm looking at all the Year 12 music theory that's been added to Year 11. I'm not going to redo Year 11 stuff, so if you want to listen to that, you'll have to watch the other video. Let's get into it. First up, we're going to talk about the questions that you might get asked. So there's some really obvious ones that are probably worth 1 mark, which is name something or identify. The right question tends to be harder and is worth about 3 marks, usually, like write a scale or write a chord. And describe tends to be a tricky little question that catches people out. So that's like a dot, and then the question might be describe the articulation. And a lot of people say staccato, where really the answer should be short and detached. Okay, let's get into it. Simple meter. So I'm just going to strike these out. This is Year 11 stuff. I'm going to go a little bit slow through it though, so that you can look at it and try and answer these questions yourself. So simple meter, done last year. Comp, done last year. Irregular meter is new. So irregular meter is really talking about the time signature being a prime number starting from 5. 5, 7, 11, 13. That's probably about it. And what tends to happen is, because irregular meter doesn't feel very nice to play, usually irregular meter is broken up into regular meter. So for example, this piece here is usually cut down here, and then you have a bar of 4/4 and a bar of 3/4, which makes it feel a lot better. It doesn't actually have that, but it just feels like that. Some people might feel that this one is in 6 and 1, or something like that. So then the piece would be 4/3, 4/3. A piece that went 4/3, 1/6, 2/5 would be a wild ride to listen to. It'd be very hard to listen to if it was broken up like that. Another example would be this song here. This is 5/4, and this one here is broken up into 3 and 2. It sort of sounds like this. That's pretty good with one hand. So you can kind of hear again it's broken into a regular meter. Lastly, sometimes you'll find things that look like this. This is a regular meter that then has an irregular bar, and that's not irregular meter. It's just a regular bar. It's just a little bit different, and it's worth remembering. Usually this functions like a pause or a fermata, and it's because maybe a bit of staging needs to be moved, or there's a narrative line or something like that that goes in there, or maybe the composer just wants to put you off a little bit. So it's really like a pause, and that's an irregular bar. Right, moving on. Great, so try and remember how these kind of things go. These are all from Year 11, nothing new. Hope you know what these all are. There's nothing new here. How easy is this course? 100%. That's what all of you should be getting. This is new, tenor clef. So what color we should do? Tenor clef or alto clef looks like this. They're both the same. And they're called a C clef. And it means that this line that they're on is the note name C. So if I put a note like that, I play a C or a middle C. So if I put that into treble clef, that would be the same as this note here. They are now the same. The reason you have them is because some instruments spend a lot of time in this range, and you would be reading ledger lines for days. So this one that I've drawn here is an alto clef. If I get rid of all of this, and I drew a, oh, this is a bit ugly, sorry. But if I drew the C part on there, that is a tenor clef, and that means that this line is C. So that note there is middle C. All right, that's those ones done. On to things we've already done. Tab, did that, did all that. Oh, new accidentals. Okay, so we've got to learn about double sharps and double flats. So if I have an A, I can put this silly little symbol in front of it, and that means go up 2 semitones. If I had the same note and I put 2 flats in it, That means go down 2 semitones, and that's called a double flat. So you've got double sharps, double flats, and this note and this note are the same, A double flat and G, and they are called enharmonic equivalents. The same note with a different name. So that would be the same as C sharp and D flat. Now the reason we need double sharps and double flats is because of some silly music theory stuff. But first off, we have to learn up 7 sharps and 7 flats. Now, in reality, you never use more than 6. And that's because the only scale with 7 sharps is C sharp, which realistically would probably use D flat major. And the only scale with 7 flats is C flat major, which is just silly, would use B major. So in reality, we never use 7 sharps and 7 flats. I guess sometimes 7 sharps and C sharp major gets used, but not very often. If we just quickly looked at why on earth we would have double sharps and double flats, if I tried to write the scale of G sharp major, which is silly, I need to make the pattern of tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone. And one of the rules I have is I'm never allowed to use the same letter name twice. So if I start here with G sharp, when I get up to here, I somehow need to make that F into a G note. And so the only way I can do that is if I put a double sharp there to make it into a G. So that would be an example of why I would need a double sharp, double flat. They're a bit of a silly thing, but you have to know them. A new thing for year 12 is an atonal thing, which means nothing from a scale. It's not from a normal scale. It's just no tone, no key center. It's, you know, this kind of horror movie stuff. And if it sounds silly, but atonal music can be quite interesting to listen to sometimes. So maybe go and listen to some atonal pieces, try and just embrace it and enjoy it, and you never know, you might like it. Onto some scales. We've done these. Ionian. Done. It would be great if you could write some of these down. You know, you want to be able to remember them. Just because I'm showing them to you doesn't mean you know it. You have to know them. We have a new one, the Dorian. Now, the first thing to remember with scales, let's use a sensible color. Excuse you, come back. What's happened to my pen? The first thing to remember with scales is that they're always named after the note they start on. So if I start on a D, my scale has to be called D something. So if I quickly write out the rest of this scale, like this, Dorian means the second mode of the major scale. So C major going from D to D. The reason we have that is because when you do that, it sounds quite different to C major. And so what I've drawn in front of you now is D Dorian. It's C major going from D to D, which is the second mode of the major scale, and you always name it after the note that it starts on. Now, a totally different way to think about this is if I was to get rid of all this, I'll go again. A lot of people think of it like this. D Dorian has a lowered third and a lowered seventh from the major scale. So if I wrote this out now, here's my major scale with this. And if I now lowered the third and seventh, essentially I'd turn these into naturals because I'm lowering them. I now also have D Dorian, which you can see is now just all the white notes, or it's just C major going from D to D. The one thing you can't do is you can't mix and match the two things I just showed you. That causes all sorts of problems. You can't lower the third and seventh and also think about it as the second mode. You must choose one or the other. Okay, that's D Dorian. Well, I mean, you've got to do other Dorians, not just D, but D's the easy one. Nothing new here. Generic intervals. We've got some new intervals, so I'm just going to start with this one first. A generic interval means that you count the numbers. So when you're doing intervals, you always count the number first, and generic means not major, minor, augmented, diminished. Easy. That's year one stuff. But we need that because when we do some of these augmented, diminished, we need to know that. So to make this one here, I've now written a perfect. To make a perfect augmented, all we do is we raise it a semitone. If I want to make it a diminished, I lower it a semitone. Remembering that I did the number first, the generic interval first. Moving on to some harder ones. When we do this one here, let's go with a third. So if I want to make it augmented, same process, I raise it. If I want to make it minor, I've got to make it flat or lowered by a semitone. And if I want to make it diminished, I've got to double flat it back to that new accidental that we learned. So I guess you have to work out whether it's major, minor, or perfect first. Another interval you have to know is the tritone. Tri, like triceratops, and tricycle means 3. So I would go F and I'd go up 3 tones to B. I could also go, what would be a different one? I could go G to D flat, which is now a 5th. This one was a 4th. Well, I guess that's a diminished 5th and an augmented 4th. And both of those are still tritones. Now lastly, with intervals, there are lots and lots of ways to do intervals. You can count semitones. You can think about them like a minor third comes from the minor scale or something like that. So that's fine. Whatever works for you. But just remember, it's really don't mix two systems together, or you'll get super confused. As I mentioned earlier with scales. Modulations mean changing the key of the melody, and so we've added a new one. You have to be able to identify a modulation to the subdominant, which is the 4th, of course. Triads, we've got a few new ones in here, so we'll go through this one. A major triad is 1, 3, 5. Looks like this. Oh, that's neat. Minor triad is 1, lowered, 3rd, 5th. Looks like this. Lowered, 3rd. Augmented is 1, 3, raised, 5th. Looks like this. Diminished is 1, lowered, 3rd, lowered, 5th. I always use the word lowered instead of flattened because it's not always just a flat. In this case, because I've chosen a really easy key, it does happen to be flattened and sharp, but lowered and raised is probably a better way to think of it. With the first inversion, if I put the root note, put it up the top here, that's a first inversion. If I put both of these notes up, that's now a second inversion. Obviously, if it's just in this, what's that called? Thirds, it's in root position. And primary and secondary triads, we did in the last video. Chords, which we've kind of done, but we'll go through this again. Major is 1, 3, 5, 7. Looks like this. F is so easy. Dominant is 1, 3, 5, lowered 7th. Again, it's not always just a flat symbol, but if you didn't know and you were guessing, put a flat symbol on because it's probably right for at least half of the time. 1, lowered 3rd, 5, lowered 7th. Lowered 3rd, 5, lowered 7th. Okay, now I haven't done the 9th because the 9th is always the same note. It's the major 9th or it's the second note of the scale. So you just add another 3rd on, making sure it's from the scale. And for all of these chords, it's the same. The difference between a 9th and a second is it's a 9th when you have the 7th in there. That's what it means. So when I would write these chord symbols, I would now get rid of the 7 and just go F major 9. This would be F9 because it's a dominant, and when we dominant chords, we just get rid of the word dominant. And then this one would be F minor 9. Let's get rid of all of that. This chord here is 1, lowered 3rd, lowered lowered 7th, and then it tells us here that we also want a lowered 5th. So that would be 1 lowered, lowered, and we've done minor 7 flat 5 chord. Alternate symbols we did last time, but they are confusing. Major 7th can be done with a triangle, dominant is nothing, minor is a dash, and minor 7 flat 5 is a circle with a line through it. You have to know the circle, which is a diminished 7th symbol, but we don't have to learn a diminished 7th chord. Chord names. So that can be a little tricky thing, like that's contemporary chord names. So here, instead of saying we're in the key of F major, instead of calling this a 1 chord, in contemporary land, we would call this an F triad. And then rather than using Roman numeral notation when we do inversions, we just say what the inversion is. So let's say we had an F chord in the right hand, but in the bass of the piano part we had an A, then we would just call this chord an F over A. We wouldn't do that normal nomenclature of 6s or 6/4s and stuff like that. So yeah, and I mentioned in the last one, if I added, what color am I at? If I added, and turn this into a dominant chord, when we're writing dominant chords, we just get rid of the word dominant. So F7 means F dominant 7. No new stuff, but make sure you know this stuff because it is examinable. Same thing here, no new stuff from last year. This is my cop-out from last time. Go watch Wikipedia. No new forms. This is all pretty basic, but you still got to know how it works. The Fermata. Good song, that one, by Kirk Franklin. Smile, go and have a listen. What are you going to do in this part of the YouTube video? Is everyone just going to switch off? Oh, composition techniques. Imitation, we're done. Inversion, something new. Inversion means to play the same melody but upside down. So originally it's this. To invert it means the same. Nice and easy. The next composition device is augmentation, which means play the rhythm value is twice as long, or maybe not even twice as long, just longer. So you can see this one here is ×2. This one here is, I guess it's another ×2, so I've augmented it twice. Diminution is the exact opposite, making it shorter, but the longer and shorter is probably a really, primary school way of thinking about these two concepts. If you see here, I've started with this little crotchet melody. And then I've sort of done a diminution here in the vibraphone to make a little ostinato pattern. So maybe that's going. And then up in the flute here, I've done it twice as quick. So another diminution. Over here, I've done a diminution with an inversion. So it would go, first time it's, second time it's, and then I've done an augmentation here to make, with a harmony, to make a nice sort of chord pattern. And that all going together will start a song. So composers use this stuff all the time. And it's not limited to Western art. Often when we talk about compositional devices, a lot of people think it's limited to Western art and classical. It is used in all music all the time, from jazz solos to contemporary Billie Eilish melodies. It's used all the time because it works. So if you're writing a song and you haven't used any compositional devices, it's going to be, indie, alternative indie. We're almost done. Not quite done though, because this is probably the hardest stuff. When we're transposing instruments, we need to know 4 transpositions. They are B flat, E flat, F, and A. What that means is that when you play a C on your instrument, you hear these notes. You hear a B flat instead. When you play a C on some instruments, you hear E flat. When you play a C on some instruments, you hear an F instead. When you play a C on some instruments, you hear an A instead. Why, you ask? Why? Everybody asks. It's because when the instruments were designed, this is how it worked. I don't know. I mean, I do know, but it's a long explanation. Just trust me, this happens. It's partly also to do because way back in the day, one guy played trumpet in Germany, and then 1,000 kilometers away, which was a very long day's travel, another guy played a B flat, but his B flat was actually C, not B flat. Anyway, so what you have to know is these transpositions. It's important to remember the wording that when on your instrument you play a C, you hear these notes over here. Now, in the syllabus, it's just said that you have to know those transpositions, but it doesn't say what instruments you have to know them on. So I don't know how that's going to get worded in an exam. Presumably, you know, there's some assistance there because there's heaps of instruments that get transpositioned, and I don't know which ones are more important or which are the most common. I've made this handy little diagram, which I think is the most common. But I think in an exam, you'd get a question like, transpose this melody for alto sax in E flat. I think that's how it would have to be worded because it doesn't actually tell you which instruments to learn. Who knows then? Okay, I think we're done. Now remember, just because I've explained it to you doesn't mean you know it. You have to go and write yourself some questions, or get a teacher to write you some questions, or a friend to write you questions about that content, and see if you know it and see if you can do it. I hope it was really helpful, and I'll see you soon.